Hi, everybody. I'm here with David Brammer, and we're going to talk about recruiter enablement. David, thanks very much for taking the time to join me today. Give us a quick introduction.
Pleasure. Hi, Adam. So I'm David Brammer. Currently, I'm helping a bunch of different businesses on an advisory capacity with their global kind of TA hiring needs. Formerly global head of TA for Ocado, head of TA for Kingfisher, Stonegate, a number of other companies, lots of them in tech, lots of them in retail. And yeah, really glad to be here.
When did you actually, you've done quite a few retail businesses. I get Ocado is a kind of retail tech business. Did you always have an interest in retail, or was that just a coincidence that you ended up in lots of different retail businesses?
I think I fell into it, So I kind of started working for Boots in about 2010.
Yeah.
And I got a bit of a bug for it. People always kind of say that retail, the one constant is change in retail, which is a lovely kind of phrase. My dad always said that because he worked for like 35 years for Thorntons and then subsequently for Poundland, designing their stores and stuff. And you get a bit of a bug for it because there's a lot of pace behind it. But there's not a lot of continuity. So you kind of have these huge churning kind of numbers of people that are working in the organization, and they kind of join and they leave, and the attrition rates are super high typically, and you have a lot of movement and mobility internally. Things just change a lot, and I kind of got the bug for it. But then I didn't necessarily make a planned change to go into kind of TK Maxx from Boots, or TJX rather, but I just fell in love with that business, and the people there are just magical. I absolutely love that business. Still, probably to this day, my favorite company I've ever worked in. And then I followed a HR director from TK Maxx to Kingfisher just by lucky chance. And the difference, I think, with Ocado is the perception out there largely is that Ocado is a retailer, and of course that is true. Ocado does have a retail business in a joint venture with M&S, but actually Ocado is all about robotics and automation and AI. It's an incredible business, all about tech and the future of automated online kind of e-commerce and shopping and distribution networks, and how that can all look and work. And they're involved in everything from kind of vertical farming to self-driving vehicles and all sorts. They're a brilliant tech business, but largely misconstrued and misunderstood as a retailer. And they're really not.
Yeah.
So
I share everything that you just said about retail. However, I honestly, one of the most enjoyable periods of my career was when I was at PwC and spent nine months on a major project with Asda. And honestly, I just loved going into Asda House, and it was like a beehive, and so many people there, companies coming in like pitching their jam, and it was absolutely brilliant. I loved it. Anyway,
it's great.
Let's get onto the topic. Recruiter enablement. What's recruiter enablement to you? What does it mean?
I think for me, recruiter enablement's all about giving the recruiters all the tools and the behaviors and the skills and assets that they need to kind of go about doing a great job. So I think you can compartmentalize it into a bunch of different things, and some of it is just the difference between recruitment and TA, right? So I like to think about the difference between recruitment and TA as recruitment is the operational element. You have to make a hire. It is going to take X amount of work to find the right person to make that hire and to embed them into that business. TA for me is is a broader kind of topic, right? It's about working with the HR business partner, with the learning partner, understanding the workforce planning of the business, understanding what the talent matrices look like, right? Understanding who's kind of on the high flyers group and the high potential group, and if you've got 6 different management accountants and you need to recruit a 7th, what's missing from the 6th, right? TA is more holistic for me. So I think teaching the operational objective kind of part of recruiting, you've got great kind of platforms out there like Social Talent, and Johnny Campbell and his team do an amazing job with a fantastic product that I've used for many, many years with pretty much every employer I've had. that teaches some of the fundamentals of operational and recruiting and hiring. Sorry. But then I think some of the softer skills and some of the business partnering, which is a term which I think is commonly used but is also commonly misunderstood, is the bit where the biggest opportunity comes, right? So you can't necessarily teach someone to read between the lines of a conversation. And so many times in recruiting, especially when you start to do stuff in the exec or the senior leadership space, you know, you might be doing something kind of covert, right? You might be engaged to go out to the market and find someone before the person who's in role, the incumbent, even knows that they're going, you know, and you have to learn these kind of stealth tactics, and you can't really necessarily get some of that stuff until you've done it. Yeah. So I'm a believer in people kind of being exposed to different stuff, and I've preached many times about rotational, the importance of doing rotational moves with your recruiters, you know. Yeah. Like anyone just being a pure tech player, a pure HR specialist, a pure marketing or finance specialist. I think that there is real value in people kind of having that breadth of understanding of how different departments work, right? I think there's become this huge divide. I don't know if you've experienced this or not. I'd be interested to know your view, but there's this almost massive divide these days between tech and non-tech recruiter, right? And every gig that I ever go into as the head of TA, they're like, you know, we really need someone from a tech background, or, you know, we really want someone who's, you know, been at a scale up or a startup. And you kind of go, well, I've always seen recruitment as a bit of an algorithm, right? You can apply it to different markets, you can apply it to different industries. At some point in my career, I had no retail industry experience. Now, you would argue I've got probably too much. At some point, you know, when I started out, I did 6 years on the agency side for a company called Computer People, and I was SAP and you know, MS Windows guys into the Ministry of Defence through Serco, and have any experience or any knowledge of what it meant to be security cleared to level 2 or whatever it was until I got it. And so I believe in this kind of rotational bit, and that I think is probably the biggest logic that I apply when I'm thinking holistically about enablement. That's the bit that I apply mostly to recruiters, because I really do value that, and I'm having recruiters from most disciplines, including wind farm engineers when I was at Eon, you know, pretty niche stuff, right? I think you have to kind of cut your teeth doing all sorts of different stuff so you get the context and you understand also what you love doing, and then you can find your niche and go with it, right?
I mean, I absolutely agree with your concepts around rotating people into different areas so they get a breadth of understanding. I hadn't really thought about it an awful lot, but it's a very good point. I certainly believe in the concept of knowledge sharing, because I think when somebody leaves their job in talent acquisition, they often take a whole lot of knowledge away with them that the person coming into that job after them and all their colleagues doing other types of recruitment should all be benefiting from. So people shouldn't be leaving with, you know, taking knowledge with them. But what I want to find out about is, I think you've done quite a lot of different initiatives and things. You talked about acquiring social talent for your recruiters in the past. What are some of the other things that you've done in the various different leadership jobs that you've held to better enable recruiters?
So I actually I don't know that the company still exists in this kind of context any longer, but because I think they sold to AMS a little while back. But a chap I know really well called Jeremy Tepper started a firm called Talent Collective.
Yeah.
And I used the Talent Collective a couple of times actually, but the first time I used them was at Boots. And what we actually kind of went to them with was a bit of a problem statement. And the problem statement was, we've got a pretty transient recruitment team, right, with really high turnover and lots of movement. And there's a lot of kind of inconsistency, because Boots had kind of done the okey cokey a little bit with the recruiting team. So they were out in the field and they reported to HR, then they were centralized, and they were back out in the field again. And each time it happened, the perception, or I guess the value or the objective of that recruiter or those different recruiters would get kind of lost a little bit, and they'd kind of go, and that role would it would kind of morph into something different for each individual that was in the regions. And so we kind of brought in the talent collective and kind of said, look, well, here's the problem, here's what we're experiencing. We want to bring in some consistency, not around necessarily what it is to be a recruiter, but around some of the baseline expectations. And what they did was they kind of helped us in a really nice format to kind of sit with all the recruiters and to kind of do the contracting bit almost, that kind of said, well, what is it to be a recruiter here? What does that look like? And the reason I think that felt so authentic was because the recruiters were in the room. So they were kind of giving the live feedback of, here's what it is for me to be a recruiter. I understand what you want me to be. I think I can see what Cheryl does and what Navdeep does and blah, blah, blah. But actually, let's talk about it. And in that kind of room, it ended up becoming this kind of working co-op almost, that kind of said, what are the things that we absolutely need to, you know, those kind of traditional stop, start, continue type sections, right? What are the things that we really value, that we think add value and do a great job? What is it that we're doing that doesn't really add value, that we can trim and make us a little bit leaner? And, you know, what do we need to start doing? And actually, there were very few things in the start, but there were lots of stuff in the start, because, you know, as it transpired, a lot of the recruiters were being kind of dragged into what you would call, you know, HR operational stuff, and just removing some of those kind of layers of crap that people shouldn't be getting involved in was actually one of the pinnacle moves, I think, in just kind of aligning what they should be, and then recontracting with the business and with the HR partners and heads of HR out in the field, whose expectation was that they would be whatever they wanted them to be, and that they were just a flexible resource. And we kind of moved the dynamic from you're a resource to you're a recruiter, and your time is dedicated. If you're being asked to do other things, then we need to do some recontracting. And actually, that was probably single-handedly one of the most valuable things that we ever did. So I kind of referred to it as a kind of a working co-op at the time. But yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different examples like that. But I think another one with, when I was with one of the other kind of retail businesses, was we had an entity in Canada, we had an entity in the States, we had an entity in Europe. But then within Europe, you would have kind of a breakdown of, well, that's a distribution team, that's a head office team, that's a buy, that's a merch team, and they would all have different kind of practices and ways of working and stuff. And kind of actually starting that rotational bit and kind of saying, well, you know what, actually there are 4 different levels of recruiter, if you want to call it that, from a hierarchical kind of perspective. Administrator, you work up to a resourcer, to a recruiter, senior recruiter, manager, etc. Kind of starting to do the contracting with those guys as to what some of the consistent things are to demonstrate that you're ready for the next move, and that next move can happen irrespective of whether you're in distribution, whether you're in, you know, the head office team or wherever you are. That ended up being a really good thing too, because it kind of created this kind of talent pathway. And the talent in and of itself then it allows the enablement, because it becomes much more transparent, much clearer what the objectives are and what the expectations are at each level, and how you have to contribute. That looks different. So that's another example, but always underpinned by giving the right tools to kind of do the job too. I think the social talent bit is really important, because it sets a basic expectation of what good looks like, and then it also helps with the contracting and the KPIs. Not that I'm a huge fan of using KPIs necessarily. I would rather that objectives were much more kind of high level, and, you know, here are our hiring targets as a team, as a collective, let's hit the hiring target. I think sometimes when you've got 4 recruiters in a team all doing the same thing, one sends 20 emails a month, one sends 2,000, right? and there's no real correlation between how they're doing their job, because they're both ultimately hitting their targets. But you want to have some consistency and some expectation. So what you kind of do is start looking at, well, actually, I'm not really interested in how many emails you send, but I am really interested in what your conversion rate is.
Yeah, absolutely. So in summary of a few of the different things you've said, you've talked about transparency and clear communication around what the expectations are, working with the teams to help to invite them to participate in creating, what that looks like, what good looks like, reviewing things you shouldn't be doing and getting rid of them, and making sure everybody's trained in the same type of way so that they'll understand what's, great.
Yeah, definitely. Consistency, I think. I think if there's anything that you take from it, it's consistency. You and I have talked about this previously, and I'll repeat it for the benefit of the recording. I am a firm believer that if someone is a conversationalist, if they're a people person, and they've got even an ounce of charisma, anyone can afford to be an exceptional recruiter, because it's really about people and it's about conversation. And I think if you then have the right frameworks, operational kind of tactics in place, you're always on to a winner, really. But consistency is the thing that underpins everything for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think if an individual has those personal characteristics, if you're enabling them properly, I couldn't agree more. I think everybody with those characteristics can be taught to be a great recruiter.
Yeah.
No, David, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today. I know we could talk about this for hours. We'll maybe do it again in a few weeks' time. But look, thanks so much for taking the time, and I hope everybody's enjoyed this. All the best.
Thanks, everyone.